Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to be explaining complicated muscle building concepts so that a fourth grader could understand them. Okay, the reason I even know these really detailed hypertrophy ideas is because I've studied hundreds of hours into mastering the science behind muscle growth. I hired Chris Beardsley, he's one of the top exercise physiologists in the entire world, as my personal mentor. I've taken his mentorship for over a year, spent multiple thousands of dollars to learn from him. And I've also served over 3,000 personal training sessions and hundreds of clients. And I'm just obsessed over actually understanding on a very detailed level how muscle growth works. But also, I don't want to bore you with physiology concepts, start talking about neuromechanical matching and mechanical tension and all these really high level words that you don't care and that you don't understand. I would much rather just explain it in a way that's super simple. That way, a fourth grader could even understand how muscle growth actually works, okay? And that's exactly what my intention is in this video, is to just make these very esoteric, complicated ideas very simple for you so that you can understand with frameworks like how muscle growth really works, okay? And the important idea, right, if I only had 3 seconds to explain how muscle growth works and I was gonna die in 3 seconds, I can only say one thing. Literally what I would say is gritty reps. I would say gritty reps, and then you would be like, well, what's gritty reps? Then I would die, right? But then you would go on a whole journey of figuring out exactly what gritty reps means. And through that process, you would actually be able to learn exactly how muscle growth works, okay? So really, I'm gonna start, we'll use first principles thinking. I'm gonna first show you exactly what a gritty rep is, okay? So that's gonna be stage one, is we're gonna talk, I'm gonna show you, start with the end in mind. We're gonna go over a gritty rep together. Then from there, I'm gonna be able to break down all the different levels and the ideas that makes a gritty rep, and in very simple frameworks so that you can understand them, okay? So let's start with that, guys. I'm gonna show you first what the heck is a gritty rep, all right? I'll show you exactly what a gritty rep is, guys. Watch this. All right, so really, guys, the gritty rep is, those last few reps before failure on a set, when it's getting really hard, right? You're pushing or pulling as hard as you possibly can, but the weight is moving slow on its own. That is a gritty rep, okay? So that is exactly what we're gonna go for here. All right, so watch this, guys. All right, so to make it a gritty rep, you really want to pick a weight that's going to help you just get right near failure, right around that 5, 6, 7 rep range, right? You can do a higher rep set, but the gritty reps would just be those last ones at the end, so you might as well just skip out on all those fluff reps and get straight to the gritty reps. Okay, so what that would look like, very tactically, is just like this, guys. I'm picking a heavy weight where, notice every single one of these reps, I'm curling as hard as I possibly can. That was a little too gritty. That was too gritty rep stuff. Okay, so see how every single one of those reps, I'm curling as hard as I can, and it's going slow on its own. It's not going slow manually, right? I'm not forcing it to go slow. It's going slow automatically just because it's heavy. Because that is literally what the gritty reps are. So those are the most meaningful reps when it comes to muscle growth. Okay, but I kind of want to break this down even deeper so you can understand all the different components to it, okay? So first of all, why are the gritty reps, and understanding the gritty reps, why is this such a big deal, right? Why is this such a game changer? Well, when you realize that it's just those last 5 before failure that actually create muscle growth in the first place, you realize how much more efficient and effective you can be with your workouts. Because when you're just optimizing for those last 5 reps, you realize that you don't need to get exhausted. You don't really need to put your muscles through through the pain, through the ringer, right? You don't need to do all these meathead fitness influencer training strategies of just chasing the burn, right? All that stuff that's very common, stuff that I used to do before I learned how this works. But once you realize it's just the gritty reps that matter, you can be very patient with your workout, right? So I always use the metaphor of cutting through a steak, right? If building muscle was like cutting through a steak, using the gritty reps and just optimizing for the gritty reps, it's like using a steak knife, right? So you're just being very effective with each thing that you're doing, right? And you can take a long rest between sets, and you can sharpen your knife, right? And then take a nice effective cut, long rest, sharpen your knife, right? So it's not just about using a butter knife, going fast, right? Putting your body through torture, right? Chasing the burn. It's just about being very patient and very tactical. You're focusing on the quality, not just the brute force, okay? But now I want to explain a couple of different ideas that's gonna really help you understand this even on a deeper level. Okay, so when it comes to gritty reps, right? So now this is the end point, right? Where I want to break this down into 2 ideas. Okay, the first idea is going to be called motor unit recruitment. Okay, before you panic, okay, this will make a lot of sense. Okay, motor unit recruitment is a really important idea to understand when it comes to the gritty reps. Okay, so what is motor unit recruitment? I'm going to explain exactly what it is. Okay, so every muscle in your body, for example, the biceps, right? The biceps is not just one muscle. Okay, every muscle in your body works the same way. It's not just one muscle. Every muscle in your body actually has hundreds of thousands of muscle fibers inside of your muscle, right? And muscle growth, hypertrophy is a fancy word for muscle growth, doesn't occur to the whole muscle at once. It occurs only to specific amounts of those fibers inside the muscle, right? So when you're building muscle, for example, you're not just building the whole biceps, you're building muscle on each of those little muscle fibers, and that's what creates muscle growth, okay? But you need to understand that now that you don't know, like, okay, muscle growth, it isn't just happening to the whole muscle, it's happening to a certain amount of those fibers. You need to understand how to gain access to more of those fibers. Because based on the type of move that you're doing, you're only gonna be actually gaining access to a certain amount of those fibers. Okay, so here's what I mean. All right, let's say there's 200,000 muscle fibers inside my bicep. Okay, if based on how much effort I give is going to determine how many muscle fibers are switching on and being used, right? So for example, if I do something with very light amount of effort, right? For example, right, let's just say I do like a little curl on air, right? This is very small amount of effort, right? Notice I'm not actually like, I'm not giving much effort because there's not much resistance here, okay? But now I want you to imagine that now I start curling as hard as I possibly can. Okay, now I'm giving way more effort. So it's about how hard you're pushing, right? So even if it's fast, right? If I'm curling as hard as I possibly can, I'm giving max effort, I'm switching on a bunch of muscle fibers. Okay, if I'm giving a small amount of effort, I'm not actually pushing very hard at all, then I'm not gonna be activating that many muscle fibers, right? So it's kind of like this. You guys know those punching bag machines at the arcade where when you punch kind of soft, it has a very small score, but when you punch super hard, it gives a big score. Same exact thing when it comes to motor unit recruitment, when it comes to gaining access to muscle fibers in a workout. If I push very softly and I get a small score, that means only, let's say 5% of the fibers are gonna switch on and actually contribute. But if I punch really hard and I got a big score, now I'm using 80% of the muscle fibers, right? I'm gonna be using way more. So that's the first important idea to understand, is when it comes to getting the gritty reps, is you wanna be able to gain access to as many muscle fibers as you can, which means that you have to push or pull as hard as you can, right? Because if I'm pushing halfway, like half effort, I'm only gonna gain access. I'm not gonna gain access to as many muscle fibers as I would otherwise would be able to if I was pushing or pulling as hard as I possibly could. Okay, so that's idea number 1. It is really important to understand that because you can only apply muscle growth to the fibers that are activated, you have to be able to push or pull as hard as you possibly can so you can gain access to as many as possible. Hope that makes sense. If you're a 4th grader, let me know. Did you understand that? Okay, no 4th graders are watching this. But okay, so that's idea number 1, guys, is you got to be able to get high levels of motor unit recruitment. Why? So that we can gain access to as many muscle fibers as possible, okay? So the reason why this is also important, guys, if I was just following the advice of like a lot of people online, where they're gonna say stuff like, you gotta go really slow and control, really get the mind muscle connection, just get the full range of motion, get the stretch and the squeeze, right? It's very easy that I could sell myself short, right? I could sell myself short and do a weight that isn't gonna actually allow me to gain access to those new fibers that have been dormant, right? Like a lot of those muscle fibers in your muscles, the reason why they haven't been growing is because a lot of them haven't been required to actually activate. They're like dormant, they're sleeping in your muscles, right? That's why like a baby builds muscles so quickly, because all its muscle fibers are dormant when it's a baby. So it can build muscle by like walking and doing anything, because anything that they do is new. So new muscle fibers are like activating for the first time, right? But for you've probably trained a lot of the same muscle fibers over and over and over, right? So if you're following, for example, the advice, like I'm saying, of like that's out there, you might sell yourself short. You might grab a weight like a little bit lighter easy bar than you truly have the potential to do, but you're really gonna focus on going slow, right? You're really gonna like try to get that burn, try to get that squeeze, okay? The thing is, like, obviously I'm gaining access to some muscle fibers here, right? I'm giving obviously some effort. I'm not giving max effort like I did over there on the cable. So this might serve me if I was a complete gym noob. Like this might help me go from ground zero to level 2, but this is not what's going to help me get from level 2 to level 3 or level 3 to level 4, right? So this becomes especially important once you're like in the intermediate territory and you want to get to advanced. It's a little bit less important if you're just like a gym noob, unless you just want to get results more efficiently. Like even for people that are newbies, I still teach them how to do the gritty reps, because that's how you can just compress time. It's how you can just expedite your muscle growth process. So you just be very tactical of, hey, every single week I'm gaining access to new muscle fibers, okay? So hope that makes sense of how important it is to not just sell yourself short and give small amounts of effort. You should be giving maximum amounts of effort, right? Pulling or pushing as hard as you can with every single rep. That's how you're going to be able to gain access to the most fibers. And if those muscle fibers are activated, then you can apply muscle growth to them, okay? But there's another important idea, guys, okay? So I'm going to draw, for example, this little punching bag machine, right? So you guys can know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You guys know these machines, and there's like the score right here. The harder you push, the bigger the score. The harder you punch, the bigger your score. The bigger the score, the more muscle fibers you gain access to. Okay, that's idea number 1, said in like 10 different ways. Hopefully it landed in one of those ways that I explained it. All right, idea number 2 though, is you need to understand something called mechanical tension. Mechanical tension, okay? So mechanical tension, here's a funny idea, right? So, and this is like something I learned from Chris, but back in the 70s, like when they first started studying hypertrophy, muscle growth, they like figured out, okay, mechanical tension is the driver of muscle growth. But then like they started really like making more hypotheses, and then they came up with something called the 3-part model, which they were like, well, it's not just mechanical tension, it's also metabolic stress and muscle damage that creates muscle growth. So then it was floating around that there was all 3 of these things were drivers of hypertrophy, which this actually clouded up the data, or it clouded up the rationale of a lot of like how people, you know, believed muscle growth worked. And people started thinking, okay, if muscle damage creates muscle growth, then we need to do these really high volume strategies. We need to put our body through pain, right? And then there's like a lot of people taking steroids that are just going to build muscle regardless, that are, you know, just trying to get as much muscle damage as possible. And obviously they're still look great. So it just really makes this stuff like a lot less clear cut and makes people a lot more confused, because when people that are taking steroids are also saying stuff like muscle damage creates muscle growth, then it's just hard to actually like find the truth, which is, you know, why there's a lot of misinformation that's always disseminated. But anyways, you need to understand basically that now it is like without a shadow of a doubt, they know that muscle damage and metabolic stress are not drivers of hypertrophy. It's mechanical tension, okay? So I know that doesn't make sense yet, but it's about to, okay? So mechanical tension, guys, this is really just like the pulling force that the muscle fibers experience, okay? So what that means is, first step is we have to activate the muscle fiber, but the second step is you have to apply mechanical tension. The fiber that's activated has to experience this pulling force for then the muscle growth, the hypertrophy process to occur, right? So for example, I could do a lot of exercises that I can gain access to a lot of muscle fibers, but that doesn't mean that I'm always going to build muscle. For example, what I showed you earlier, I could go around all day curling as hard as I can like this, gaining access to tons of muscle fibers, but because this contraction is so fast, I'm never going to build muscle like this, okay? So I have high levels of motor unit recruitment here, gaining access to lots of fibers, but I have very low mechanical tension here. None of the fibers that I'm activating are actually experiencing that pulling force, right? But on the flip side, I could flex my bicep really hard like this. Now I'm experiencing a lot of mechanical tension when I experience that pulling force. But because I'm not actually giving max levels of effort, I could do this all day. I'm not gonna build any new muscle. A baby could flex. If like you're a little kid and you've never worked out before, you can actually build a little bit of muscle by just flexing, because you are gaining access to a few new muscle fibers. But if you've been lifting for, even a week, it's going to take giving those high levels of effort and experiencing that pulling force at the same time to then build muscle. Okay, if that went over your head, don't worry about it. Okay, so remember, mechanical tension, this is just the pulling force. Okay, so right here, if I'm curling with no weight, but I'm really flexing my biceps, I'm experiencing mechanical tension right now. But because I'm not getting those max levels of effort, I'm only experiencing that mechanical tension on, let's say arbitrarily, 10% of the muscle fibers. Okay, so you need both. You need to experience that flexing feeling. You need to experience that pulling force, but you need to understand I need to experience it while I'm gaining access to as many muscle fibers as possible. So I could experience all this pulling force that I want, but until I experience it and push or pull as hard as I can, and I'm gaining access to lots of fibers, that's how you can actually create muscle growth to those, reach those new limits that you've never reached before, make new gains. Okay, so just to break that down even further, guys, mechanical tension, this is that pulling force. Okay, pulling force, right? Kind of think of this like flex, like the flex feeling, right? So that flex feeling, this is what is going to kick off the muscle growth process. Okay, when a muscle fiber identifies this pulling force, mechanical tension, it signals off the hypertrophy process. Okay, basically how it works is like these receptors on the cell membrane kick off something called myofibril protein synthesis, and this whole the hypertrophy process basically occurs. And you don't need to know basically how this works, but basically the myofibril splits in half, and then a new one comes and builds on top of it. So you don't need to know that, but you need to understand that the pulling force, feeling that flex, is also integral to actually creating muscle growth. Okay, so each of these independently aren't going to be optimal, right? You need both of these together. So I could go around, like I said, all day and just experiencing that pulling force, and I could go all day and just curling as hard as I can, but unless I'm experiencing both at the same time, pushing as hard as I can and experiencing the pulling force, I'll never actually be able to apply that mechanical tension to those new muscle fibers that I'm activating, right? So that's the whole point with going from good to great, is you need to learn how to gain access from 60% of your muscle fibers to then 70%, 80%. The only reason I have a lot of muscle is because I've been slowly learning how to gain access to more and more of the muscle fibers in my body. And because I'm doing the gritty reps, I've been applying that pulling force, that mechanical tension, to all those new muscle fibers that I've learned to gain access to. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, guys. A little bit higher level stuff, okay, but here's another idea. I'll explain it in a couple more ways just to really drive this home, in case it took me forever to understand this. I remember my coach Chris I probably heard him say it a million times before I've actually understood how this works, right? But for example, let's say if I jump as hard, basketball players, right? They are jumping as high as they can, right? They're giving that max level of effort, but their legs are still skinny, right? So that just tells us that it's not just about how hard you push. It's also, it needs to be experienced, that slow contraction. It needs to experience that pulling force too. Okay, so I'm gonna show you now, follow me. I'm gonna show you guys 3 different curl variations. One is gonna have high motor unit recruitment, one is gonna have high mechanical tension, and then the third one is gonna have them both together. So follow me. All right, so first I'll do a curl with super high motor unit recruitment. Would look exactly like this, guys. I'm gonna take a weight. I can do this with weight or no weight, right? And notice I'm gonna be curling as hard as I possibly can. So it's gonna have really high recruitment. Okay, so that's super high recruitment. I'm curling as hard as I can. Now here's a curl with really high mechanical tension. Really experiencing that pulling force. Really feeling that flex. Okay, now if I want to get the best of both worlds, right, I need to be able to get them both at the same time. I need to be able to curl as hard as I can, gain access to as many muscle fibers as possible, but it also needs to be a slow contraction. Okay, so follow me. Here's the best way you can do that. Okay, you could do this with I could do this with a dumbbell to make it easier, or with the cable. I'll get you get a dumbbell. Yeah. All right, I'll show you guys again, right? So high motor unit recruitment, just like this, curling as hard as I can with every rep. Okay, high mechanical tension is I'm really focusing on just experiencing that pulling force. okay? But you'll never be able to get high recruitment and high tension with a light weight. If you want that, you need to pick a heavier weight. And that's why it's so important that to do the gritty reps is that you're picking a weight that's heavy, that you're pulling or pushing your hardest, but the weight is going slow on its own, right? So if I just select a heavier weight here, like the 55, notice guys, every one of these reps, I'm gonna curl as hard as I can. But because, see that? I'm curling as hard as I can, but because it's heavy, it's still going slow on its own. See that? That's a gritty rep. High recruitment, getting access to lots of fibers, and high tension. It's going slow. So I'm actually applying that mechanical tension to all those fibers that I activate. And that is how muscle growth works. Okay, so those are really complicated physiological ideas, simplified. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't make complete 100% sense and you have any questions about it, just message me on Instagram and I'll be happy to have a conversation, see if you're actually interested in this stuff. Because I'm kind of a nerd with this stuff. I don't know why I spent so much time, effort, and money to learn this stuff, but I did. Probably because, like, you know, I'm a coach, so my job is to help people build muscle. But all I knew was the only data I had in my brain about building muscle before I learned this stuff was, oh, just tear down the muscle and it'll build back bigger with the protein. That's all I ever heard, right? That's all I knew. I didn't actually, if you said, well, Jacob, like, there's gotta be more to it. Like, how does muscle growth actually work? I couldn't have told you before, right? And I was following all those other strategies of, like, just kind of stuff you hear online. Like, you know, just like do tons of volume, right? Just supersets, drop sets, just make your muscles burn. And I was like spinning my tires wondering like why, one, I was stuck, right? And no, that wasn't even the worst part about it, because like I already had a pretty decent body just because it was intermediate at that point, but I was just spending so much time in the gym and it was starting to feel like such a chore. I hurt my shoulder, I was knocked out of the gym for 2 months, and in that time, that's when I found Chris Beardsley. And I was like, you know what? First time I heard him on the podcast, I could barely understand any of it. He was yapping kind of like how I was just yapping, saying these big words I didn't understand. And I was like, all right, I got to go on a journey to just figure out how this stuff works. And once I did, I'm so grateful that I did, because I was just able to literally cut out all that extra stuff I was doing for my workouts. And I was just focusing on just those gritty reps. And my workouts went from like an hour and a half, 2 hours to like 35 to 45 minutes. But I didn't lose any of my gains. I actually made gains. And I worked out from 6-7 days a week to like 4 to 5 days a week, but made gains. I was like, this is crazy, because it's incredibly valuable if you can compress time. Like, time is the most valuable asset that any of us have, especially if you're like a career-driven type of guy and you're spending a lot of time on, you know, work, and you have other important values in your life. Like, how valuable would it be to be able to just know that you're making amazing progress, but not having to spend tons of time and effort and energy, like going through the ringer to do it? Super valuable. So I felt like I was in the 0.1% of people that actually put in the work to learn this. And sometimes it feels like I'm just shouting into a brick wall, because there's so many people that are just don't actually understand how this works and are just, you know, just word vomiting all the stuff that they hear and just regurgitating it all. And I just kind of feel like the lone wolf who's just trying to tell the truth. And it's not always easy, you know, being that guy that's willing to just have integrity and stand up for what he knows is actually true. But I'm not afraid to be that guy. And I'll sit here shouting into a brick wall until I die if I need to. But I'm the type of dude that, like, I don't want to be right. I just want to build muscle, and I just want to learn, and I'm a seeker of truth. So if you're a rational brain right now, after watching that whole video, for the 0.01% of people that are still here to the end that could withstand me just yapping about science, if you're still here, then I know that you have that desire for truth inside you too. And I just want to say thank you. And I see you and I respect you. So later, guys. I'll see you in the next video.